Right now, guns in the spotlight again and again for all the wrong reasons. After a school shooting in Georgia and a massive gun bust in New York City, we're asking what can and should be done. And next, new accusations against Sheldon Silver in the Vito Lopez cover-up scandal. Could Silver have prevented others from being sexually harassed? And later, the cost of college. Will costs that continue to rise and more people taking out more and more debt? Will this topple the system, and what can be done to help the next generation land on its feet? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in again tonight for Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening, August the 21st. And yet again on RFL, we begin with guns. Three things over the past 3 days putting that subject back on the front page. Yesterday, a gunman threatened children and staff at a suburban Atlanta elementary school, a school that's attended by more than 800 children from pre-K through the 5th grade. The suspect, 20-year-old Michael Brandon Hill, faces charges including aggravated assault on a police officer, terroristic threats, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, making it automatically an illegal gun. Hill was able to slip into Atlanta's Ronald E. McNair Academy and hold one or two staff members captive in the front office. Police say the man shot at responding officers at least a half dozen times, and they returned fire. He later surrendered thanks to a school worker, and no one was hurt. Meanwhile, New York City just saw its biggest gun bust ever. The undercover investigation netted 254 illegal firearms, resulting in the indictment of 19 people involved in gun trafficking. All of the guns were sold to a single NYPD undercover detective posing as a distributor. The weapons included high-capacity assault weapons and a fully automatic machine gun, as well as lots of handguns. The arrests broke up a major gun-running operation that trafficked weapons between North and South Carolina and New York City. Traffickers traveled up and down the Iron Pipeline, as it's known, often arriving by bus in Chinatown. And now we're learning that the NRA has built up a secret national database of gun owners. According to BuzzFeed, the National Rifle Association has, quote, gone to incredible lengths to compile information on tens of millions of gun owners, and doing so without their consent. This, as the NRA has launched a very public and very vocal fight against a national gun registry. Well, let's bring in our panel on this. We are joined tonight by New York Assemblywoman Shelley Mayer. She is a Democrat representing Yonkers. Dominic Carter is here, political journalist and author. Congressman Jim Himes is with us tonight, Democrat from Connecticut. And Richard St. Paul is back for 2 nights in a row, a Republican strategist, former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. Welcome. Let's start, first of all, with the laws or lack of laws that we've seen since Newtown, and every time we get a gun incident that pops up, we ask the question again and again. Congressman, I want to start with you on the federal level. Nothing happened after Newtown despite 90% approval for background checks. Is there any reason to think that that's going to change in the coming months once the recess ends in September?
You know, not months, but years. And as those of us who were close to Newtown, as our spirits flagged as we watched the Senate fail to get background checks done, something that 90% of the American people think is a good idea, common sense idea. You know, I remind people that in 1982, when the president was shot, President Reagan, it took 6-7 years to get an assault weapons ban done. That's the nature of the political opposition to this stuff. At the end of the day, though, it is going to happen. It's going to take years, but the more of these school shootings, the more of these, now we're much more conscious of every time somewhere in the country there is an incident like this, and of course there are incidents like this every week, we're conscious of it. And so the pressure will build. It's just going to take time.
Assemblywoman, you were part of a legislative body that was able to get a gun law passed. The New York State Assembly and Legislature passing the SAFE Act in the wake of Newtown, as did the Connecticut State Legislature. How much pressure was there, even in an assembly that's overwhelmingly Democratic and passed the bill with, much easier than the Senate did?
Right.
How much blowback was there? How much pressure were you getting before that vote?
Well, there was pressure, and it wasn't always before the vote. Interesting, it was after the vote. The activists, and I believe the NRA, sent out their mail, frankly. They got a little caught off guard by Governor Cuomo taking the lead and insisting that we do it sooner rather than later. And I did get quite a lot of criticism in my district from gun owners, but also got a wonderful email from an NRA member who quit the NRA in my district. I have a framed email from him because he believed their position was wrong on the bill. So I had criticism, and I thought overwhelming support, but there was a lot of noise, and the bill wasn't perfect because we did it so quickly. We had to go back and make some technical corrections. But to the governor's credit and the legislature's credit, in my opinion, we got the bill done quickly enough, as did the state of Connecticut, to get on the map.
What is needed to change the status quo, whether it's on the federal level or on state levels where there hasn't been pushes for gun control or unsuccessful pushes for gun control? Dominic, Richard, is it more horrible incidents? Is it leadership, like from executives? What might change the balance?
Let's talk about the real issue about why the background checks didn't pass in the Senate and why we have things like Georgia and Sandy Hook. These are people who have mental illnesses. And if a background check doesn't cover that, then it's not going to be effective. That's why we see Columbine, Sandy Hook, and a host of other crimes, including the one committed by a military official in Texas in Fort Hood, is because these folks suffer from mental illnesses. That's what needs to be targeted. You don't cut the whole tree down because of one bad apple, a couple bad apples. Let's target the specific issue, which is mental illness, background checks on people and find out if they have mental illnesses. That will help us in gun control.
Congressman?
Look, there's no question that we can do a much better job at addressing people with mental illness. No one's arguing that we shouldn't do better, but to say that that's the answer is just completely to ignore the fact that we are a society that is awash in guns, and not all of the violence that is out there. And by the way, an awful lot of the violence that happens as a result of people committing suicide, right? Now, you could say that that's mental illness, but to say that it's only mental illness, of course, is to run exactly the talking point that the NRA wants run. The fact is we're awash in guns, and if we make them readily available, it's not going to be, it's not going to be just the people who are unbalanced that are killing it. It's going to be domestic violence, which is a huge issue. It's going to be, people who successfully commit suicide with guns. It turns out that people who are really distressed and feeling like it's time to end it all other methods actually don't work all that well. Guns are pretty successful at ending people's lives.
Let me put it in perspective. The #1 killer of Americans are cheeseburgers. Heart disease is the #1 killer of Americans. There are over 300 million guns. There are over 300 million people in this country. Guns killing people is not the #1 killer of Americans. Most Americans are law-abiding citizens. What we saw in New York was good police work, getting 250 guns off the street. Excellent police work. Had nothing to do with stop and frisk, by the way, and I hope Bloomberg and the commission won't take credit for that. Had nothing to do with that. Good old-fashioned police work did that. That's what we need. Keeping guns out of criminal hands, not keeping guns out of law-abiding citizens' hands.
And of course, the way you keep guns out of criminal hands is by having solid background checks, so that people who have a history of violence, who are suspects for terrorists. Imagine this: in this country today, there is a faction arguing against seeing whether you've got links to Al Qaeda before you buy a gun.
If we had officials like these two, and you're not in public office, but elected officials like this all across America, we wouldn't have a problem. So to a degree, Andrew, these great officials are preaching to the choir. The problem is the NRA is entrenched, the NRA has money, and until you break the NRA, and I don't know how that's going to get done, but until you have enough officials that are willing, because these officials couldn't get reelected in certain districts in America, as you well know. And there are television shows tonight, right now, as we're on the air, that argue the exact opposite point in support of gun control and support of guns, and make people look like us, look like something's wrong with us.
People have a constitutional right to. The Second Amendment says to bear firearms, right? Where does it stop?
But the Supreme Court says that can be limited.
Yes, it is limited.
And certainly the bills that we passed, for example, the state bill, absolutely protects your right under the Second Amendment as defined by the U.S. Constitution. So I think that argument is off the table, and it needs to be off the table.
But what it didn't protect is people who carry weapons. Now there's a list of people who you can be made public and has been made public, and there were a lot of backlash from that because people who had order of protections, now their address was public because they owned a weapon. I mean, there are flaws in this system. Where do we stop? Does the government get a list of people who have weapons so that they can take them away from them? Where do we stop from
I'm glad you brought that up, because we had the other story today that the NRA has its own registry that they're using primarily for political and lobbying reasons and fundraising as well. And that's compiled from a lot of gun data, a lot of public records, the same way that the Journal News, which was the newspaper that got all the heat for publishing the gun registry in Westchester County and Rockland County as well, but using it for their own purposes. To me, that struck me as a little hypocritical, that they're using the same tool that they're trying to stop the federal government from using. What's the harm in letting police know if they're responding to a scene if the owner of the home at that scene has a gun?
because it's giving up enormous control. And if you're the NRA, I mean, newsflash, the NRA, hypocrites. Newsflash. I mean, no offense, no offense, but what the point I'm trying to make is they will say it's for fundraising purposes. They'll come up with a million reasons. I return to my original point. If we had officials like these two in office across the country, we wouldn't be debating this tonight. But the fact of the matter is money controls a lot of this, and the NRA has the money. You go against their agenda, they target you, you have a primary, and you're out of office. Bottom line.
You know, and the thing that's crazy about this debate, it need not be a partisan debate. Guess what? It never has been, right? And if the Republican Party wants to firmly associate itself with the position of the NRA and say guns, which whether they're the #1 killer or the #7 killer, are a hell of a killer, right? 30,000 Americans a year, and say, but that's different than a car, where you got to get a license and take a test. And by the way, the state's going to know if you got a license or not. Or different than a dog, where you got to register your dog with the municipality. Guns are different. No registration, no license, no training. If the Republican Party really wants to affiliate itself with that absurd idea as a Democrat, God bless them.
I agree. Guns are different. Second Amendment, constitutional right, no constitutional right to keep a dog, or what is the other example that you used?
No one is arguing
a driver's
that,
license.
No one's saying we should
Certainly
violate
true.
people's constitutional
But that's
rights.
what we're talking about. Look, the NRA keeping track of people who like guns. Oh, shocker! It's no different than elected officials keeping track.
But it's the same thing they don't want the government doing.
Right, exactly, because it's the government, and the government abuses their power. Look at the NSA. Look at the wiretaps and the information that they're keeping track on Americans. We just heard today that they even 75% of what happens in this country that goes through internet is now kept track of by the NSA. Do we really want government to have a list of everybody who has a weapon who are law-abiding citizens?
I think a lot of people might
Scary.
actually
I
feel that.
Scary.
think I really do think you're out of sync. And I have a district that has a considerable conservative part of it, and I assume you have some in your district as well. And notwithstanding that, living in a city like Yonkers or New York City, Bridgeport, Stanford, where guns cause substantial number of deaths a year, the majority of voters, in my opinion, are with us on this. And over time, I agree with the congressman, Congress will come along because the pressure, and significantly from women, mothers, will force members to do the right thing ultimately.
We're
But
gonna
it's
get
not-
I got to make that the last word because I got to move on.
All right, but it's not guns, it's people with mental illnesses.
All right, I'll
That's
give you
all
the
I
last word.
Thank
That's
you.
good. All right, we're going to take a quick break on RFL. Up next, the White House has reportedly cut off military aid to Egypt, but did so quietly. Was that the right move? And later, new accusations against Sheldon Silver in the sexual harassment cover-up. Could he and should he have done more, and what should his fate be up in Albany? That's next when we return.